He insulted the black waiter in front of everyone. But when the truth came out, the whole room froze. It was a Friday night, the kind that made the city feel alive. Soft jazz played in the background, plates clattered, and the glow of golden lights bounced off polished wine glasses. Every table in that high-end restaurant was filled, businessmen talking deals, couples celebrating anniversaries, tourists snapping photos of dishes they could barely pronounce. And in the middle of it all walked a man who thought he owned the world. A man in a crisp designer suit, gold watch flashing under the light, every step screaming entitlement. He didn't notice the art on the walls, the music, or the warmth in the air. Because for him, the only thing that mattered was being seen. He looked around with that familiar arrogance, the kind that makes others shrink a little just to stay out of his way. When the waiter approached, a black man with steady eyes and the kind of smile that comes from patience, not weakness, the man barely glanced at him. "Hey boy," he said, snapping his fingers like he was calling a dog. "Clean this up fast. I don't want to sit in someone else's mess." The restaurant went quiet for half a second. The laughter faded, the forks paused. People heard it, they just pretended not to. No one wanted to get involved. Not the couple sitting nearby, not the group at the bar. They all did what people always do, looked away. The waiter froze for just a moment, not out of fear, but out of restraint. His eyes lifted, meeting the man's for the briefest second. There was no hate in them, no flash of anger, just quiet understanding. Then he smiled, a small, polite, perfectly professional smile. "Of course, sir," he said softly. And with that, he bent down and began to clear the table. He wiped each surface gently, stacked the plates neatly, and reset the silverware as if he were crafting art. Every move was calm, precise, and graceful. Not because he had to be, but because he chose to be. The man scoffed under his breath. "That's more like it," he muttered, adjusting his tie, completely unaware that his arrogance had just written the first line of a story he'd never forget. A few tables away, an older woman whispered to her husband, "Poor man. I don't know how he stays so calm." Her husband replied quietly, "He's probably used to it." But the waiter wasn't used to it. He was above it. Behind that calm face was a man who had built himself from the ground up. A man who had faced insults before, not in fancy restaurants, but in boardrooms, meetings, and contracts where people didn't believe someone like him could be in charge. He'd learned long ago that sometimes silence cuts deeper than words. And that night, his silence spoke volumes. As he moved around the table, his mind wasn't focused on the insult. He was thinking about the vision he had for this place, how he wanted to turn it into something bigger, fairer, kinder. He thought of the employees who looked up to him, the people who depended on him, and how he couldn't afford to react like the man who had just belittled him. He wasn't just a waiter. He was the new owner. The man who had bought this very restaurant 2 weeks ago, quietly, without announcement, without bragging. Because real success doesn't scream. It speaks softly and it waits. So he continued his work, calm and graceful, as the arrogant man kept talking, loud enough for everyone to hear. "People like him should be grateful they even get to work here," he said to his friends, laughing. They laughed too, nervously, unsure if they should. But the waiter didn't flinch. He carried the dirty dishes back to the kitchen, set them down carefully, and washed his hands. As he dried them, one of the younger waiters whispered, "You okay, sir?" He nodded. "I'm fine. Some people just don't know who they're talking to yet." The younger waiter smiled, not understanding what he meant, but he could feel it. There was something in his voice. Something powerful. Something that said, "You can humiliate me in front of everyone, but you will never break me." Minutes later, the waiter walked back out, carrying fresh plates for another table. His steps were confident, steady. He caught the reflection of himself in a glass window, the same uniform, the same apron, and smiled slightly. He wasn't thinking about revenge. He was thinking about dignity. And as the arrogant man laughed at another joke, unaware that the entire staff had gone quiet, the waiter kept serving with the same patience and poise he always had. Because he knew what no one else in that room knew. That sometimes the greatest power a man can hold is the power not to react. He knew that soon, very soon, the truth would come out. And when it did, it wouldn't need shouting or anger or revenge. It would come wrapped in calm, dressed in grace, and carried by justice itself. That night, the waiter wasn't serving food. He was serving a lesson about respect, about patience, about how the loudest person in the room is often the weakest one. And as he walked past the man who had humiliated him, he smiled again, that same quiet, confident smile. Because deep down, he already knew something no one else did. The world was about to change. And when it did, the man in the designer suit would finally understand what true class really looks like. The night wore on, and the restaurant hummed with chatter, clinking glasses, and the soft scrape of chairs against polished floors. But for one man, the world seemed to shrink to the space between the insult and the response. The insults didn't stop. "Don't spill that." "You're moving too slow." "Do you even belong here?" Each word thrown at him like a dart, aimed to sting, to humiliate, to remind him of what he wasn't in the eyes of the world around him. The rich man's voice carried over the room, loud, sharp, commanding attention. Some guests flinched, uncomfortable, unsure if they should intervene. Some looked away, pretending it wasn't happening. Some whispered quietly to each other, secretly wondering how anyone could endure such blatant disrespect. But the waiter, he never broke. Not even for a second. He moved with a calm so deliberate it was almost unnatural. Each motion precise, measured, graceful, wiping a glass, stacking plates, adjusting cutlery. Every gesture, every step, radiated quiet authority. He didn't respond with words, because he didn't need to. Silence in this moment was louder than the man's arrogance. Silence in this moment spoke of something far deeper than anger, far heavier than pride. It spoke of control, patience, and confidence that cannot be shaken by insults. The room began to notice. A subtle shift rippled through the crowd. Guests, once engrossed in their own meals, now watched quietly. The rich man's friends laughed nervously at the harsh comments, but their eyes occasionally darted toward the waiter. There was something different about him, something unspoken, a presence that demanded attention, not through words, but through the simple fact of being. People had mistaken him for a servant, someone beneath notice, someone whose worth could be measured by the shimmer of polished shoes or the speed at which he carried trays. But that night, everyone was slowly realizing, worth cannot be measured by titles, uniforms, or the way others treat you. Some power is silent. Some authority is invisible until it chooses to reveal itself. The waiter's calm was not born of naivety or fear. It was born of experience. He had endured countless judgments in countless places, each one chiseling him into the man who could stand unmoved in the face of disrespect. He had learned a lesson early. Reaction is the weapon of the weak. Restraint is the armor of the strong. As he moved across the floor, he caught the reflections of himself in polished surfaces, mirrors, windows, silverware. Each reflection showed a man composed, focused, unshaken. He was aware of the eyes following him, both curious and judgmental, but he did not let their scrutiny dictate his movements. He served not to please, not to prove, but because it was his role, his calling, and his choice. With every step, he communicated something louder than words ever could. You may insult me, you may underestimate me, but you do not define me. Even the other staff, watching from the sidelines, began to feel the weight of his presence. The younger waiters, who had learned to flinch at harsh words, now watched in awe. The older staff, who had been beaten down by arrogance and entitlement for years, felt a spark of hope. The rich man continued to speak, unaware of the quiet storm he had ignited. His arrogance had no clue it had met a force far stronger than disdain. The more he tried to assert dominance, the more invisible power radiated from the waiter. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about maintaining dignity in a world that constantly seeks to strip it away. Each insult bounced off the waiter, fading like ripples on water, leaving him untouched at the center. Every eye in the restaurant began to sense it. There was something in him that couldn't be shaken. There was strength in his calm. There was authority in his silence. And there was a story that none of them yet knew, a story that would soon turn the room upside down. Time seemed to stretch. The noise of the restaurant faded into a backdrop against the intensity of this quiet battle. Guests leaned slightly forward in their chairs, conversations hushed. Even the man who had thrown the insults paused for a moment, sensing, without understanding why, that this was not the reaction he expected. And in that pause, the waiter continued his work. Polished glasses aligned plates, smooth movements, everything in perfect rhythm. every detail meticulous, every gesture a silent statement. I will not stoop to meet you in anger, but I will rise above. By the end of the night, a subtle transformation had occurred in the room. The laughter that had once been mocking was replaced with a mixture of awe and unease. The whispers had grown louder, questions forming in the minds of everyone who had seen the interaction. Who is this man? What is he capable of? How could someone remain so unshakable under such blatant disrespect? Because in that silence, they had all witnessed a rare truth. Real strength is not loud. Real power is not measured by words or wealth or status. It is measured by composure, by the ability to maintain dignity when the world is doing everything to strip it away. The waiter didn't smile for revenge. He didn't glare to intimidate. He didn't even think about the man who had insulted him. He simply existed, calm, present, and unbroken. And as he finished clearing the last table, the room, unknowingly, had begun to shift. Eyes that had mocked now lingered. He had become, without a single word, the center of attention. The waiter had proven something deeper than anyone expected. That quiet power, restraint, and grace can command more respect than wealth, arrogance, or status ever could. And in that quiet, unassuming man, they were all about to learn a lesson that would stay with them forever. The night had been long, filled with clinking glasses, soft conversations, and the constant rhythm of polished floors and moving chairs. But for one man, every second had been a silent war, and now the climax was about to arrive. As dinner wound down, a hush began to settle over the room. Guests glanced at one another, sensing something was about to happen. The energy shifted, a subtle tension spreading through the air, like the quiet before a storm. The manager, a tall man with a gentle yet authoritative presence, tapped his glass with a fork. The sound rang clearly through the room, cutting through the remaining chatter. All eyes turned toward him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice calm but deliberate, commanding attention, "please welcome the person who will be leading this restaurant from today." A few whispers ran through the room. Speculation, confusion, nervous laughter. Some thought it might be a celebrity chef or a wealthy investor taking over. No one expected what was about to unfold. The black waiter, who had endured hours of insults, snapped fingers, and condescending remarks, stepped forward. He moved with calm precision, each step measured, deliberate. No hesitation, no self-doubt. The room seemed to lean in with him, drawn by a magnetic quiet he had carried all night. He reached the front, standing tall. Slowly, deliberately, he removed his apron, folding it neatly in his hands. He adjusted his collar, straightened his posture, and looked across the room with eyes that had witnessed disrespect, yet refused to be shaken. A collective silence filled the space. Even the servers stopped in their tracks, holding trays midair. Even the guests at the bar ceased conversation. Every single person could feel the shift, a transformation in the very energy of the room. Then, in a calm, measured voice, he spoke. "I'm the new owner of this place." The words landed like a thunderclap. Gasps echoed softly around the room. The man who had mocked him, who had sneered and barked commands, froze. His face drained of color. The arrogance that had filled the room only moments ago was gone, replaced with shock, disbelief, and the faintest tremor of fear. He wasn't just eating dinner anymore, he was eating his own words. The realization hit him like a cold wave. Every insult, every mocking comment, every glance of superiority had all been directed at someone who now had power over him. Someone he had underestimated completely. The waiter's calm demeanor didn't falter. He didn't gloat, he didn't laugh, and he didn't show a shred of vindictiveness. He simply stood there, composed, radiating dignity. And in that moment, the true weight of his presence became clear to everyone. Guests began murmuring quietly to each other. "What how? I didn't see this coming." They called him just a waiter. How could he be the owner? Even the staff, who had witnessed his quiet power all night, could hardly contain their awe. They had watched his restraint, his grace, and now it had all led to this moment, a revelation so shocking it rewrote everything in their minds. The man who had insulted him tried to regain control. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He searched for a smirk, a clever remark, anything to reclaim some sense of superiority, but there was nothing. The waiter's calm authority left no room for excuses, no space for arrogance, no escape from the truth. In that moment, every insult thrown earlier, the snapping fingers, the mocking tone, the belittling comments, all of it came rushing back to the man like a mirror he couldn't look away from. And now, he realized the waiter hadn't just survived the night. He had risen above it. The black waiter allowed a brief, almost imperceptible smile to cross his face, not prideful, not mean-spirited, just a quiet acknowledgement of the justice in the moment. He had stayed calm, he had endured, he had persevered, and now the world around him had to acknowledge it. The room didn't erupt in applause. It didn't need to. The silence itself was deafening, carrying more weight than any cheer could. The rich man sat frozen, guests whispered, and even the staff could feel the enormity of what had just happened. This wasn't just about a restaurant. This wasn't just about money, status, or position. This was about respect, patience, dignity, and quiet power, virtues that speak louder than any insult, louder than arrogance, louder than words meant to demean. And as he looked around the room, every eye that met his was met with the same calm, commanding presence. A presence that said, "You may underestimate me, mock me, and insult me, but it changes nothing about who I am and what I am capable of." The man who had belittled him had learned a lesson that night, a lesson that would stay with him forever. Never judge someone by appearances. Never assume power is always loud. And never confuse humility with weakness. The black waiter stepped back, straightened his jacket, and nodded politely to the manager. He had claimed his position not with violence, not with anger, not with cruelty, but with quiet confidence, integrity, and resilience. And as he walked toward the kitchen, the entire restaurant seemed to exhale, collectively recognizing the magnitude of what had just occurred. The insults had ended. The arrogance had been humbled. And the true power, silent, measured, and unshakable, had been revealed for all to see. In that moment, everyone in the room understood something profound. Real authority isn't given. It isn't loud. It isn't flaunted. It is earned, carried with grace, and revealed at the precise moment when the world least expects it. The man who had sneered earlier had finally seen it. The waiter wasn't just serving meals. He was serving truth, patience, and justice on a plate, one that the arrogant man couldn't swallow fast enough. And the story of that night, the reveal, the shock, the lesson, would not soon be forgotten. The room was silent, but it was not the kind of silence that comes from emptiness. It was a silence heavy with realization, with reflection, with awe. Every person present, from the wealthy patrons in their tailored suits to the servers who had witnessed the evening unfold, felt the weight of the moment pressing down on them. The new owner, the black waiter who had endured insult after insult, now stood tall, calm, and composed. He looked directly at the man who had mocked him, sneered at him, and treated him as though he were beneath notice. His gaze was steady, unwavering, filled not with anger, but with the quiet authority that comes from integrity. "Respect doesn't care about your wallet," he said slowly, letting the words hang in the air like a gentle but firm command. "It cares about your heart." The simplicity of the statement carried a weight that no one could ignore. It was a truth so profound, so universally clear, yet so often forgotten in a world obsessed with wealth, status, and appearances. Respect could not be bought. It could not be demanded. It could not be faked. It came only from character, from the choices one makes when no one is watching, and from the courage to treat others with dignity even when they might treat you poorly. No one clapped. No one spoke. Because no words could capture what everyone was feeling. The air was thick with introspection. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, suddenly aware of their own assumptions, their own judgments, their own pride. The man who had insulted the waiter sat frozen, his face pale, his earlier confidence now evaporated. He had believed his money and status could command the room. He had believed that a harsh word or a condescending gesture could assert dominance. And yet, in the face of one quiet, patient man, all his arrogance crumbled. The waiter's calm was not passive. It was active strength. It was measured power. It was a demonstration that true authority does not roar. It remains steadfast in principle, unwavering under pressure, and unshaken by insult. The restaurant staff, many of whom had seen this man's patience throughout the evening, now looked at him with admiration. They realized what they had witnessed was not just a moment of poetic justice. It was a masterclass in dignity. The young servers whispered among themselves, barely audible. Did you see that? He didn't say a word in response to the insults, and yet he commands more respect than anyone here. The older staff nodded silently, recognizing in him a rare combination of humility and quiet authority. The wealthy guests, too, could not look away. They were struck by the undeniable truth. You cannot buy respect, you cannot demand it, and you certainly cannot mock it without consequence. It is earned by your actions, by your composure, by your courage to remain moral and upright when others seek to bring you down. The man who had insulted the waiter tried to regain some sense of composure. He opened his mouth, as if to say something clever, to reclaim the power he had believed he wielded. But the words stuck in his throat, because he had already lost. Not in money, not in status, not in opportunity, but in the very human and irreplaceable currency of respect. He had underestimated the quiet power of character. The waiter allowed a faint, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgment to accompany his words. It was a subtle gesture, not prideful, not boastful, but radiated the truth of the lesson he had just delivered. Respect doesn't care about your wallet. It cares about your heart. Those words seemed to echo through the room long after they were spoken. Guests glanced at each other. Servers looked at one another in awe. Even the clinking of glasses seemed muted, as if the restaurant itself had absorbed the weight of the truth. And in that quiet, reflective moment, everyone understood something essential. Respect is not transactional. Respect is not performative. Respect is not conditional on the wealth, status, or appearances of the person standing before you. It comes from character, from humility, from a willingness to see the humanity in everyone. The rich man who had sneered, snapped fingers, and looked down on the waiter all evening had learned a lesson he would never forget. It was not a lesson he could ignore. It was not a lesson he could buy. It was a lesson written in patience, demonstrated in dignity, and sealed in truth. For the waiter, this was not revenge. This was not triumph. This was a demonstration of what it means to hold true power, a power that does not crush others, that does not boast, that does not seek vengeance. Is a power that endures, that inspires, that teaches. And as the silence stretched on, the atmosphere in the room transformed. The arrogance, the laughter, the judgments, all dissolved under the quiet weight of a simple truth. The room had witnessed something unforgettable, something that would linger in their minds long after the night ended. It was a reminder that life does not reward the loudest, the cruelest, or the wealthiest. It rewards those who carry themselves with integrity, patience, and moral courage. It rewards those who can remain calm in the face of injustice. It rewards those who understand that true strength is silent, steady, and unshakable. And in that moment, everyone in the room, whether they realized it or not, had been changed. The lesson was clear. The power of dignity, patience, and heart had spoken louder than any insult ever could. And the world, at least for that night in that restaurant, had been reminded of what real respect truly means. The story didn't end that night. It began there. What happened inside that elegant restaurant was more than an awkward confrontation or a moment of poetic justice. It was a spark, a reminder of something the world had forgotten. That real power doesn't shout. It shines quietly through grace, dignity, and restraint. Within days, people were talking. First, it was whispers among the staff, the waiters, chefs, and hostesses who had witnessed the scene unfold with their own eyes. Then it reached the regular customers, the ones who had seen the same waiter serve them week after week with patience and professionalism, never realizing who he truly was. Soon after, someone shared the story online, and that's when everything changed. It spread like wildfire, not because a rich man had been embarrassed, not because someone had been put in their place, but because in a world that too often rewards arrogance, someone finally reminded everyone what real power looks like. People everywhere connected to the story. It wasn't just about race, class, or money. It was about human value, about how easy it is to judge someone based on appearance, and how dangerous it is to mistake humility for weakness. Social media filled with comments. This gave me chills. I needed this reminder today. Real kings move in silence. The waiter, or rather, the new owner, became a quiet legend in his city. He didn't seek fame. He didn't post about it. He didn't gloat or mock the man who had disrespected him. Instead, he kept showing up, running his restaurant, greeting customers with the same kindness as before. Only now, when he smiled, there was something different behind it. It was the smile of a man who knew who he was and didn't need to prove it to anyone. The man who had insulted him didn't vanish from a story, either. He came back one evening, quietly, nervously humbled. He waited in line like everyone else, not demanding attention, not expecting to be treated differently. When the owner saw him, he didn't turn away. He didn't hold a grudge. He walked over, shook his hand, and said simply, "Welcome back. I hope you enjoy your meal." That moment hit harder than any revenge ever could. Because forgiveness, true forgiveness, is the ultimate power move. It's not weakness. It's strength so vast that arrogance can't even comprehend it. People who heard the story didn't just remember the insult. They remembered the calm. They remembered the patience. They remembered the man who could have lashed out, but instead chose to teach through action. And that's why this story lived on. Schools began sharing it during assemblies. Business coaches used it in leadership talks. Motivational speakers retold it on stages, reminding audiences that leadership isn't about control, it's about character. Even strangers online began using a simple phrase to describe it: the waiter's lesson. Because what the world saw that night wasn't revenge, it was revelation. A revelation that kindness doesn't make you weak. It makes you unstoppable. Think about it. Power fueled by ego collapses when challenged. But power built on kindness? That kind of strength endures, inspires, and grows. It multiplies. The new owner never set out to teach a lesson. He didn't need to. His actions did the talking. Every plate he served, every smile he offered, every insult he endured, it all led to that one defining moment. And when the truth came out, it spoke louder than any argument, any status, or any wealth ever could. That's the kind of legacy no money can buy. A legacy built not on dominance but on dignity. Not on pride but on patience. Not on fear but on faith. Faith in the idea that doing the right thing will always, eventually, speak for itself. In the weeks that followed, journalists reached out to him. Podcasts wanted interviews. TV shows wanted features. He turned most of them down, saying simply, "If people learn something from that night, that's enough for me." And that's exactly what made people respect him even more. Because while others chased attention, he lived the message he preached. He didn't just own a restaurant, he owned his story. And his story, told with humility and truth, owned the hearts of millions. To this day, that restaurant stands as a symbol of what quiet strength looks like. There's no plaque, no sign, no mention of the viral moment. But if you walk in, you'll feel it, in the way the staff carry themselves, in the warmth of their service, in the pride that fills the room. It's not just a restaurant anymore. It's a reminder. A reminder that the way you treat people will always echo louder than your words. And as for the man who once snapped his fingers and said, "Hey boy, clean this up fast," he tells that story now too. Not as a tale of embarrassment, but as a turning point. He learned that night that wealth can buy you dinner, but never respect. And sometimes the person you look down on is the very person who will lift you up, through grace, through kindness, through the quiet strength of character. So yes, the story spread like wildfire. Not because a rich man was humbled, but because a humble man showed the world what true greatness looks like. And that's the legacy that lasts. Not fame, not fortune, but the simple truth that how you treat others will define who you are, far more than what you own. That night, in a single moment of revelation, a so-called waiter became more than a man. He became a mirror, reflecting the kind of respect, patience, and grace the world desperately needs. And that's why, long after the lights went out and the restaurant grew quiet again, people still tell his story. Because real power isn't in your title. It's in your heart. And that night, the man who was once insulted became the one everyone respected. Not because of what he owned, but because of who he chose to be. And that is the power of respect. No matter who you are or where you start, your character will always speak louder than your status. If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe for more real-life stories that inspire, humble, and empower. And don't forget to share this video, because someone out there might need this reminder today. This is the Untold Stories, where every tale reveals a truth the world forgets. Stay kind, stay unbreakable, and remember, your actions define your legacy.